In our previous episode, we touched on how Beijing's military expansion is touching a nerve with Western countries. But an expert says there's a catch with the Chinese regime's military power. Let's hear more from Greg Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association.
What we have to be aware of is that although the quality of the People's Republic of China's military programs and space programs is improving dramatically and is certainly world class, it's based largely particularly on former Soviet technology for hypersonic weapons, for space programs and the like, for its aero engines and even its fighter designs.
He says even though the Chinese regime is building a modern defense force with ships and aircrafts,
but it's using 20th century design and technology, and in many respects 20th century strategic thinking. Its whole approach, for example, to recreating the Japanese Greater Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere by moving down through the South Pacific and looking at sea denial to its adversaries.
Copley says the question is whether Beijing can match the West's new thinking.
Particularly with the new AUKUS treaty, the Australia, United Kingdom, United States treaty, which is focusing on the creation of new technology, weapons and thinking so that you don't try to catch up with the PRC in terms of sheer numbers of ships and the like, but rather to eclipse the People's Liberation Army by dramatic new technologies which are being developed by the private sectors in, as I say, Britain, Australia and the United States.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to welcome Foreign Minister Payne back to...
That security deal generated a lot of buzz when it was announced.
A new national security initiative.
Beijing said the pact was extremely irresponsible.
Under it, the three countries will deepen their cooperation in a wide range of defense technologies. Among the priorities are artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, and quantum computing. It also promised to get Australia nuclear-powered submarines.
This partnership has never been stronger, it's never been more important.
But some are concerned about whether there's enough time. Beijing is aiming to be on par with the U.S. military by 2027. But Australia is unlikely to get any nuclear submarines until the late 2030s. The clock is ticking. And here's Copley's argument.
There's never enough time to do things right. And all wars, when they eventually begin, are come-as-you-are wars. They don't ask whether you're ready. Wars tend to break out and you have to respond with whatever you have. And there's always going to be new technology available tomorrow or the next day. So you just have to keep developing as rapidly as possible and deploying as rapidly as possible.
He says the threat of imminent conflict tends to speed up investment in new capabilities and points out that AUKUS is trying to make the most of its limited budget and manpower.
So what we'll see, and we could see it within the next couple of years, is that, for example, even Australia could have long-range strategic strike weapons, hypersonic weapons, which could deliver standoff punishment to the People's Republic of China or the PLA forces if they attempt to encroach further southward.
Australia's former defense minister has said Australian warships would have long-range strike missiles by 2024. That's 3 years earlier than the expected timeline.
This is about Australia being prepared and making sure that we can stare down any active bullying against our country.
As for the current balance of power in the Indo-Pacific,
in reality, the US and Australia and New Zealand particularly have an advantage in the South Pacific particularly and in the Indo-Pacific overall. However, the psychological war which is underway gives the perception that the US and its allies are in confusion and on the defensive, whereas Beijing is on the offensive and is moving solidly. Now, this is a moving game of chess.
One issue is still hanging in the air, though, the safety of Taiwan.
The question is, will Beijing think that it has a limited time open to it, a window of opportunity open to it, where it must strike Taiwan, where it must expand dramatically into the South Pacific, or whether it has to wait until it has overwhelming superiority, which it may never get.
And how does the safety of Taiwan impact the U.S.?
there's no question that Taiwan and the whole question of People's Republic of China expansion is the great security concern for the United States and for the West generally. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is a small affair in overall historical terms. It's a great tragedy, of course, in individual terms, but it is a distraction from what is strategically important. And it's the Indo-Pacific, it's the question of Taiwan's security, which is the key to control of the Central Pacific.
90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors are made in Taiwan. Without these tiny chips, our computers, iPhones, and fighter jets wouldn't be possible. The island also sits on a crucial location. It's on a line of defense stretching from Japan to Malaysia, which prevents Beijing from launching submarine-based missile attacks against the U.S. But major world events are competing for Washington's attention and resources.
The Communist Party of China were virtually saved by the Russia-Ukraine war because it distracted US and Canadian and NATO interests generally back into the Euro-Atlantic sphere. It took away vast amounts of defense capability from the Indo-Pacific and has allocated them to Ukraine.
Along the same line, Congress's aid to Ukraine has topped $54 billion.
This is a fairly substantial amount of diversion of military capability.
Washington has told Taiwan that it might delay some major weapons deliveries to the island because it's focusing on arming Ukraine. Taiwan was expecting to get 250 Stinger missiles by 2026, but now there's a risk of delay. Meanwhile, the U.S. has sent over 1,400 Stinger missiles to Ukraine. Back to the money issue. With a limited defense budget, what can the U.S. do? Copley notes there's a new trend in the defense industry, where small firms are making certain weapons at a lower cost and a faster rate. He recommends that the Pentagon spend its money more effectively by moving away from traditional heavy manufacturers and embracing smaller, more diverse firms. Juliet Song, NTD News.